You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, and welcome once again to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And today we actually have a pretty interesting show lined up. We're going to have a special caller, Laurie McDonald. She's actually a therapist for abductees, a clinical therapist. She's one of only 27 that actually do this kind of therapy. So I think we're going to have some interesting questions for her about the abductee experience overall and just what it might ascertain as far as in connection with other things. I think we have a lot of questions.
It's a very unique field in that form of therapy.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
As far as alien abduction, what do you think? What do you think it is? Do you think it is real? Do you think that when people have these experiences and similar traits, I know there's a lot of perception and maybe skepticism about, well, are these people just hallucinating? Are they having dreams?
I think it could be real, but I don't think it's just one source. I don't think it's entirely alien abduction. I think it could also be experience with interdimensional beings. But of course, we'll talk about that when asked Laurie when we actually speak with her. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's so much we don't understand.
Oh, definitely, a lot we don't understand.
That just being able to comprehend some of it, discuss it, maybe find connections in it, that maybe that will make a difference in trying to understand some of it. Because as we were talking before, that anyone who thinks they have all the answers, to me, really probably doesn't have any of the answers. Really.
No, and that's the reason why we have a show like this, because we don't know all the answers, and we want to be able to talk about subjects like this that are often such a mystery to most of the population, mm-hmm. that we can start to unravel the mystery and then get further answers.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. All right, so let's go ahead and give her a call and let's get our discussion rolling.
Yep, let's get in touch with Laurie.
All right.
This is Laurie.
Hey, Laurie, this is Tony and Verna.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi, how are you? Hi.
All right, we're on the phone with Laurie McDonald, clinical hypnotherapist and abduction researcher. How you doing today, Laurie?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you.
Excellent.
Laurie, we wanted to first, before we go into the subject that we actually want to talk to you about with your practice, we wanted to go ahead and go into your background and find out what was your background with hypnotherapy to start with, and how you came to help abductees eventually. So we wanted to find out where it all came from.
Well, I've been a hypnotherapist for about 25 years, and right from school, I had an experience that seemed mega or paranormal, and at that point, I began to get a reputation for working with people who have had incidents or events. We didn't really call them experiencers then. They were abductees, and they would that word got out, and you know how it goes. So it was very interesting. I was always a believer anyway, just based on logic, and I've had experiences myself. But since I've had them throughout my entire life, they seemed to be more normal than anything, and they weren't exactly a typical experience you might have heard. So, I mean, experiencer stories come from all over the place. They come from all over the world, and based on geography, religion, spirituality, education, is really the filters that allow the experiencer to express their story. So as a researcher, it's sometimes difficult to remove all of those filters and perceptions and begin to see exactly what type of experience the person had. And of course, not everybody who believes they've been abducted or believes they're a contactee or receiving downloads are. Some of them are hallucinating, some are on drugs or alcohol, and some are misinterpreting the experience and completely. So it's a difficult subject.
It's interesting
that legitimate experiencers.
It's interesting.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, since you've done the therapy this long, you've probably can start to tell what direction some of those people are going to lean towards. Like, are they actually experiencers, or do they have the drug problem? Do they have the hallucinations? I'm sure you can probably you probably have warning signs that you know, based on just having had so much experience with experiencers, on whether or not they're going to go in a different direction or not.
Well, sure. I mean, we do a quite an intensive intake interview, and I do talk with them, prior to doing a regression session, so I can really get an idea how they express themselves, the verbiage that they use. This helps me to decide which approach I'll take in allowing a gentle alteration between the beta and the alpha brainwave, so they can move back into an experience and get a sort of a 360-degree view of it, because in that altered state, your perception can be heightened and you can perceive more than the conscious memory recollected.
It's almost like going back to the dream state, but you're having them, you're guiding them to consciously do that. Is that how you would describe it?
Well, I'm helping them get to that place, and then they go through the door on their own, however that plays out for them. It can be quite terrifying for some people just to consider that they may have had face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact with an extraterrestrial, perhaps an interdimensional being. And so it's not so much just getting into the experience, it's how does that really affect somebody?
Yeah.
When somebody's reality is challenged beyond their normal belief system, their consciousness then has an opportunity to expand, providing that the experiencer uses the event as a catalyst to self-awareness and understanding. It's really not about which craft or which being was involved, although those things are important, and we can do sort of psychological profiling on the entities so we can figure out an agenda. More importantly is the one commonality among all of the experiencers from each different race is, of course, the human. So I think the attention needs to be placed on the humans involved, the experiencers, and begin to look at it as a broader and larger experience than just an individual experience.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that you've had people from all cultures, races, and different probably different religious types. So in regards to the experience, is there since you have to filter this a lot, do you find that there is one common ground for these people that keeps coming up with everybody's experience, that
Like commonalities?
commonality, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. I mean, there are 100 commonalities, but there are some that each of them share across the board, and that is in the abduction phenomena, of course, being taken against one's will. And see, the beginning of an experience, when you feel like it's a negative, you feel like you're taken against your will, it creates an entire energy around the experience as negative or fear-based. And so the fear is sort of a common denominator across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can get past that fear into a deeper and maybe even a higher place of understanding, we begin to see the experience expand. And the experiencer has an opportunity to see if they have a role in it, if this is something that they want to continue with, or they might be able to even glean the actual entity and see who is involved in this. And then we can begin to figure out why. But it's really difficult. They're all asking, why me?
Yeah, of course.
Of course they are.
Yeah, why me? And so here's the problem. I mean, some people are asking why me and then coming or drawing certain conclusions that they must be very special and that perhaps their DNA is superior to that of their neighbors, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And so we begin to see that they can create this complex within themselves as feeling very special, feeling chosen, and perhaps they were fed this information during the experience to get them to calm down or relax. Perhaps they have been manipulated in some way to think that they're chosen. And so that we have to be very careful with that, and that's not a reality, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a reality. They're not picking, them with that intention. And so it's very, very difficult. So I've traveled all over the world, talked to experiencers with translators on remote islands, different countries, deep in the jungle. And some of the things, so I was talking to some people on a remote island, and this is an island with, electricity for just a couple of hours a day, very limited recognizable food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hungry.
Yeah.
And, but what was happening is they know two things, these people. They know the ocean and they know the sky, because this is their livelihood, this is their life, this is how they live. They fish and they navigate.
Yeah.
They're closer to the earth than most of us.
Right, absolutely. And so when they're reporting seeing fire-like glowing orbs coming out of the water and zipping off into the sky, or coming from the sky and going into the water,
Mm-hmm.
this is an anomaly. And of course, it scares them, and they're not quite sure about it. And then there'll be stories from the older people saying, well, back then we saw this or that. And so it's very interesting to see that no matter where you go, people are reporting seeing either sort of classic craft-like saucers,
Mm-hmm.
or silver orbs, triangulars, which there's a very good chance that those are ours.
Yeah.
And all over the world, it all comes down to something's happening.
Is this where you think the stories from the Hindu religion and some of the Bible stories that sound like UFO stories, from the images they put out, you think that that's how they originated, basically?
Well, I think
from these
that
cultures?
we have to look at the verbiage of how people express themselves based on time, history,
Mm-hmm.
and technology. So if you look at the biblical times, or even further back, Mesopotamia and Samaria, when each and every one of these cultures or religions reported flying chariots of fire
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
sky.
Right.
Chariots were the only transportation, fire the only source of energy. And so that's a very good description. The flying chariot of fire in the sky.
Which would make
So yes,
sense.
to me, that's a UFO. Yeah, it makes total sense. When we see that Anunnaki had quite influence over the Mesopotamian and the Sumerian people, and we know, or we think we know, that it was the Anunnaki that brought the blue and green eyes to the planet Earth. The Earth people have brown eyes and dark hair. They are the indigenous people of this planet.
Yeah.
Blue and green-eyed people are considered all related to one common ancestor that could be scientifically considered a genetic mutation. But the Anunnaki, who are described with blue and green eyes, and they too mating with the daughters of man, would have then begun to create blue-eyed people on the planet. And so we can look at all sorts of genetic traits and see what is indigenous of the earth, what is the natural progression and evolution of the people. And then we see that science actually does tell us that all blue-eyed people are related to one common ancestor about 10,000 years ago, which then aligns with the Sumerian time. So absolutely, all through time, we've reported life coming from the sky or star beings. Even prior to that, when clansmen reported spiritual entities interacting with them, so we can see the progression from clans to kingdoms, from kingdoms to countries as we progress.
The
all
Celtic
of these
tales.
changes begin to come. Yeah, and they're all
The tall
UFOs.
people, they call them.
Yeah, very tall. So it's very, it's on one hand, it seems very logical to assume that, again, beings are coming from either other planets or other dimensions. And dimensions, too, that's something that we really have to look at, because math tells us that there are parallel dimensions, and math tells us that there are other dimensions.
Yeah.
And we can see that if we can advance with technology, that even ourselves will be able to move into other dimensions or parallel dimensions and then back. So that coming and going of specific orbs, dipping in and out of space, dipping in and out of our reality, it's very difficult to say exactly where they're going or where they're coming from. We can speculate.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I used to think when I was reading a lot about this, I used to think that it was dimensional rather than just planetary. And I would tell that to people who would be in these UFO panels and the audience, or people who read about this, and they thought I was crazy. They would, and so I'm glad to hear that you think that this actually could be a reality. This could be part of the experience in the reality, and that's probably why they're not able to pinpoint exactly the origin of these beings.
To me, that would make more sense, that when people see UFOs or crafts or orbs, they see them very briefly and then they just disappear like they were never there. Instead of like taking off, they're gone. And that would explain a lot more, I think, dimensionally than just taking off into outer space and flying off. They have a way to come and go between.
Yeah, they're dipping in and out of space for sure, and that's into another dimension or into a slower, longer vibration, creating a different dimension. Then that's probably most likely. Mm-hmm. And we see that portals opening in different places of the planet when it does look like what UFOs coming through. And it's really interesting was in 1968, General Brown from the United States Army, I believe, was in Vietnam, and not far from a village called Cam Lo, right near the DMZ zone. And he stated in a press release that didn't get released that one night or two nights, UFOs came all over, and the Viet Cong and the Americans fought side by side against these UFOs. And so in other reports at that time from people, they said that a portal opened and UFOs just came flying out left and right, but it was chaos.
Wow.
So later, when talking to someone, they said what they believed happened. I learned this when I was in Cambodia, in Angkor Wat. They told me that when the portal was opened, it was opened accidentally by the energy of the war, the firing back and forth. The portal opened, and what came out was not so much aggressive as what it looked like, but fear-based and uncertain as to why they got sort of pulled into our reality.
You know what that reminds me
people
of?
Then began. Sorry?
So you know what that reminds me of is almost this other dimension. It could be their version of basically the Bermuda Triangle, where energy literally sent them somewhere else.
Well, and why not?
Yeah.
I mean, because when we see that in parallel universes even, say they're all within their own bubble, and sometimes those bubbles will touch, and it'll create a resonance, and there'll be like a little wormhole or an opening, and you may come through another portal. Maybe you'll be aware of it, maybe get sucked in, like the Bermuda Triangle, due to some form of magnetism that they're not entirely familiar with ours or whatever. So and why not?
Yeah.
It also makes sense for Mount Shasta, the way they have the round clouds up there, and people claim to see UFOs fly in and out. The townspeople have claimed that before. There could be a dimension opening and closing around there.
I've seen it myself, Mount Shasta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I've was there
so
recently, and so totally interesting. I went to a retreat up there with a pretty renowned spiritualist psychic who feels that he had some form of communication with the inner earth beings, or the Talos, who are said to have lived inside the mountain, and whether they're ET or interdimensional or subterranean, and still unclear.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very interesting, and people did have their own experiences, and I had my own experience when I was in Mount Shasta in September. It was just not so, I don't really know what it was. It was definitely odd, but I rented a old barn that had been converted into an Airbnb, and you have to go up the outside stairs, and you're up in the loft area, and it was decent.
Uh-huh.
So at night, it was small. So that night, I went to bed and realized that I was being, disturbed by the lights from their microwave and the router. So I got up and covered both of those things so that I couldn't see the light. I'm kind of light sensitive. Yeah. Then I made sure all the lights were turned out, and I went back into the little studio area to where the bed was. My friend was in the downstairs bedroom, and I went to sleep. I began to wake up. I felt something coming up behind me. I was facing the wall. Very brave that way. I was facing the wall. and I felt something, and just as I was about to roll over, all of a sudden the track light came on, bright, really light, lit up the whole entire room. Wow. And I sat up, and I could feel my heart racing, and then I said to myself, Laurie, only the lights came on. It's not that big of a deal. So I looked around and tried to determine what it was. I walked over into the little kitchen area, and they had a strange setup. You had to reach behind the fridge and click the light switch on, and it was vertical. And then there was a horizontal slide that you would slide up and down to increase the intensity of the light.
Yeah.
So I went and looked, and hadn't been touched. And the lights were bright, and I slid everything back, like double checking to make sure it was right, turned back, and laid there for a second with my eyes thinking, well, how could that have happened? And thought I'd put it on the back burner until morning, rolled over to face the wall again to show whoever was there that I was too tired to care. And the next day, I talked to the leader there of the retreat, and he felt that it sounded like, well, because then there was a really loud thump. It sounded like somebody had taken a log and tossed it up against the barn, like right where my head was.
Wow.
And so that was like really loud, and that happened after I shut all the lights back out, like as if they were kind of saying, "I'm still here, bang!"
Yeah. Get your attention.
Yeah, whatever it was wanted my attention, and so now I feel kind of bad because I really was wiped and did need my sleep, and I thought, well, maybe it would happen again the next night, but it didn't. So he thought it might have had something to do more with a Bigfoot than only because of the loud. Apparently, they throw stuff.
Speaking of
so
which,
I don't really know, to be honest. It was very unusual.
Just speaking of Bigfoot, this is the theory I have. I don't know if a lot of people believe this or not, but I think the reason a lot of people, we can't find an actual example of a Bigfoot dead or even alive physically is, again, I think there's a dimensional jump. And I wonder if some of these cryptids aren't just coming from other dimensions and they just sort of don't know where they're at. They adapt, they live. Some of them figure out how to go back and they come and go. I think that might explain some of these cryptids that exist. And Bigfoot, I wonder if isn't one of them that is smart enough to know how to go back and forth. What do you think?
Well, that's definitely possible. About 2 summers ago, I got a call from the reservation up in Northern California in the Hupa, up near the Humboldt area. And they've been there, they say, for about 10,000 years.
Wow.
They called me and said that they would like for me to come because some of the tribesmen have seen Bigfoot. One of them has a photo. And some of the other tribes people have been experiencing orange orbs. And then thirdly, some of the tribes people have seen a little naked tribe near the river.
Interesting.
All very tiny, very small, all under 30 inches.
Huh.
They said that they saw like a male with that seemed like they were like this was their reservation. They had a bow and arrow. The women had babies. They were collecting water, and it was like the women were collecting water and the male was watching them, and then they sort of walk away, shimmer away, and they're gone. So I got a great opportunity to go up to the reservation, to talk with lots of people. They drove me all over. They took me to Good Mountain and Bad Mountain. And the one man that he was so kind to allow us into his home, he told us that the little tribe is real. And they travel through inner earth tunnels, mountains, and they have done this for a long time. Mm-hmm. And in about the 1800s, the late 1800s, the U.S. Army came, and the Indians on the reservation told me they blew the tunnel opening on both ends.
Ew.
So that nobody could. There were tunnels that went straight through the mountains, and they closed both of them. And the man said that back in the 1970s, he had his own experience with some of the little tribes people, and they had asked him if you were able to stop the forestry from coming through their migration routes. Apparently, they just continued to move. And that was back in the 70s, and the people on the reservation did try to get the forestry to not go into that area. They said that they create, as they travel, these very interesting sort of curved branch homes that are very small. And while we were on the reservation, they took us to one so that we could see it when what that had been used and wasn't being used in the moment. And we did see what appeared to have been a created structure. So, of course, we can't definitively say who and what, but we can say we saw it.
Did you take
it
pictures?
Was on the reservation. Well, yeah, of course we took pictures. And so, yeah, I mean, it was just great, you know. So the problem is, up on the reservation, the people are not, they're not all on the same page right now. And there's all this anomalous activity happening. There's a huge alcohol and drug problem.
Yeah, we've heard.
The women, it was really, really bad. They told us that there was only, although it's got a good population, there was only one woman left in her 30s that knew the people's ways of canning of salmon. And this was one of their staples for a very long time. And so they're I don't know if maybe they're having this anomalous activity to perhaps wake them up to a certain level of reverence and respect for our environment, for whatever does and doesn't exist, and perhaps even empower the people to come together in a way of in cleansing themselves through some form of healing, that in fact there will be a ripple effect through their environment, that maybe it is some form of awakening. And I think that with all, not all, with most paranormal and UFO activity, it is the perfect opportunity for us to say, okay, well, what is really reality the way I've been taught? And what is reality from my own thoughts coming from my own personal experiences outside of the indoctrination of society or other people's belief systems. So it can really be a great opportunity.
Well, I noticed that when people tell their stories, they've been telling them differently since the 1940s and 50s, especially when it comes to experiencing different types of races. Back in the 40s and 50s, they talked about tall, blonde beings, many of them with blue eyes, many of them with different skin tones, and they were very prominent in those stories. And then I noticed that since the 1960s, 70s, they're talking less about those beings and more about other types of beings,
Greys, reptilians.
So why do you feel that there's been a difference in the way people are experiencing different UFO races?
Well, okay, so it was the Europeans who experienced the tall Nordic-looking blondes.
Well, Americans
These
too.
Blondes, and not nearly as much as the Europeans. So, and then really in the 50s and 60s, what they were reporting is not the gray at all, very similar, but the Zeta. And the Zeta is sort of that tannish color, also large eyes, but not with the almond shape.
Yes.
And not with such a pronounced head, but very similar in build. And so, as we're still learning, it was the Zetas often misinterpreting them with the grays. Mm-hmm. And then we understand that then the reptilians entered now, but the reptilians had already been talked about in the Mayan and Incan culture and all through South America. The reptilians have been talked about all along through their own religion, just like in our Western religion of Christianity-based ones, the gods came down and talked. So, but they weren't described as reptilians. They were with the Incas or serpent-like beings in Asia. Mm-hmm. They were then actually referred to as the Naga The Naga being related somehow, cousin-like, to the Anunnaki, where the Anunnaki walked the earth and the Naga, more serpentine, went into the water and underground bases. So all over the world, different ones. So, but the reptilians have all been known to have the ability to shapeshift. So sometimes we must consider that a reptilian could shapeshift into what appeases your particular consciousness. And if that happens to be a tall blonde with blue eyes and a silvery spacesuit, then that's what you're going to get. And so we have to be able to determine the manipulation and what the intent or the agenda or what the full interaction was, so we can see agenda.
Do you think this conforms to the individual that's being manipulated to appease them, or something that to do with how they would perceive an encounter with a being, so therefore the reptilians are like, okay, we can adapt to what this person would accept based on their own perceptions and their own ideas, and then we'll take that form?
Right. It's just a shape-shifting manipulation based on the person's comfort level. So the problem is they can't always hold a particular shape when it's a manipulation. And you'll begin to feel a reptilian energy because they act completely different than the way the grays are described, the tall grays are described, or the way the short grays are described. They act different than the way the Zetas or any other races. And so in part of my research, and I've had about 1,300 cases now.
Wow.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't believe, older statistic was that 280 million people worldwide had reported interaction or abduction with what they thought was an extraterrestrial race. So whenever I would do a meeting, I would often ask the group, how many of you reported this to some, like, where are they getting this number, right? Who reported? And very few people would put their hand up. Did I ever report mine? Own experience? I talked to Bud Hopkins.
Yeah.
And John Mack back in the day. But it wasn't like this was, tallied and reported. So when we see numbers like 280 million people being reported having some form of abduction, then we can see that this has been happening for a long time. And back in the 60s, it was the whole Charles Hall, the tall whites being on the base in New Mexico, I think the Indian Springs base. And that people said that, they could see, go to the edge of the base property line or whatever, and sometimes in the summer, the tall, very tall whites would come out and people would be able to see them. And they would have some form of telepathic communication. And that's, of course, one of the things across the board, no matter what type of entity you're involved with, is that the communication seems to be telepathic. And they can telepathically talk to you, and they can also telepathically talk to one of their other extraterrestrials where you don't hear.
Now
so they can talk over your frequency or around it, so they'll only talk with what you only get to know what they want you to know, sort of thing.
Who do you think is the most...
Which means that they're... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, who do you think is the most aggressive race out of those?
Well, I mean, the reptilians, because they don't just do physical abduction, they do psychological abduction, where they really try to create as much fear, and so they'll do all forms of psychological manipulations and see how the human responds, and that's very, very terrifying.
Yeah.
The grays with the abduction, they're so cold, so calculated, sending the small, more bot-like ones to subdue you, manipulating the delta brainwave, sometimes recreating a dream state, so a person is unsure whether it's real or a dream. But see, that and there's their loophole. When they can manipulate our brainwaves, which of course affect our behavior, we become in a dream state compliant, of course, unless it's a lucid dream. But in a regular dream state, we're not going, hey, wasn't I just eating an ice cream cone a second ago and now I'm, coloring?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't do that because we're not engaging conscious critical thinking, right? We're not doing that. And so when they manipulate the dream state and they come and take you later in the morning, if you wake up and remember bits and pieces, you go, well, it was probably just a dream.
In some occult traditions, people have been trained to have control over their dreams, and I wonder if it originated from experiences like this.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you don't learn how to control your own mind, there is a good chance somebody will want to control it for you. So understanding yourself and how we dream and how we can move into a lucid dream state, becoming conscious. There are techniques and protocols to follow. If you find yourself abducted, if you find yourself trapped in that paralyzed state where nothing on the body moves except the eyes, there is a way to break out of that. You're not trapped. If you can shift your eyes dramatically and to the left as hard as possible a couple of times, you're going to begin to secrete a hormone in the brain which awakens the body, because during that state, the awake and the sleep hormones are challenged. They're both equal. One is not dominant. When one becomes dominant, then that one takes over. So it's a very unusual state to be in, but you can break out of it and become conscious and lucid. I've done it myself and then ended up sitting up being eye to eye with two grays.
Wow.
That would actually help somebody who's having a lot of nightmares that they have no control over, not necessarily alien abduction nightmares, but just nightmares. I mean, those tools would help them.
Any nightmare. Yeah, well, in a nightmare, what you're going to want to do to stop the nightmare is begin to count your fingers. Look at your hand and begin to count. Make sure that you can count in order. If you're counting 1, 39, 50, then next thing you know, you're playing football. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so you have to be able to be consciously aware, engaging the critical thinking aspect, which is the beta brainwave, which is what we're all speaking in right now.
Yeah.
So it's the alpha brainwave is moving into the subconscious, where the dreams and the memory, everything is processed through there. Scientists are debating these days as to whether or not the solar plexus energy, that giant cluster of nerves there above the navel and under the rib cage, which is where our intuition is, where we get the gut feeling. If they're thinking that actually may be our first wave of brain input, that comes in,
wow.
And then the brain that's in the head is more of the processor, processing, because that part of it is 90% more active in the subconscious area than in the conscious state. But in the solar plexus, that is where all of the energy moves in, and this is all of the subtle and gross energies, intuition, intuitive thinking, also our ability to move inward begins with sort of relaxing deep down into that solar plexus area, where I believe it's the seat really of our divine power.
So that's like
we begin to engage.
That's like our perception. It's like a perception epicenter that then would send it to the brain's consciousness at that point.
Right, and then it moves through the critical thinking, but all along the subconscious mind is just absorbing everything, trillions of bits of information that is bypassing the awareness ability of the conscious mind. and just storing it there. So the idea, especially with hypnotherapy, is to bypass the conscious critical thinking and allow our awareness of self to move into that alpha state so that we can, like a lucid dream, where you become aware, and so you shift now back to a time or an experience, and you begin to move into that area so that you can explore it. That's your right.
So
your fundamental human right is to know yourself.
It makes me think about if the entities, that would explain why they want to paralyze the rest of your physical body, because if that's your perception areas, if they dull those, you don't have the perceptions, you won't send it to your brain. And I wonder if that's probably part of their targeting, is why they do that paralyzation, numbness to the individual that's being abducted, is if we totally block your perception areas, you're not going to remember, you're not going to have a lot, you may have little bits and pieces, but that takes care of most of it. I wonder if that has something to do with that.
Well, for sure. I mean, because they're diminishing the conscious critical thinking ability, and everything is sort of, the body is frozen, and you can't move the arms and legs, and see, all of these things are the ways in which we interpret our environment by touching, being able to move and sense it. And so they do that. So this is the thing. I believe that all of the different extraterrestrials are interested in us for one main reason. It's not limited to just the harvesting of genetics for hybridization programs. It's not limited to that. I really think that it has more to do with what we are. Many people think they understand the definition of the word human. They think it means race or people.
Yeah.
And it really does not. The word human is actually the definition of the type of entity that we are. Hue is a measurement that we use to measure the depth or saturation of light. We measure that in hues. Man is short for manifestation, or to come into the physical. A human is a light-embodied being. Gender and race are subcategories of the type of entity that we are. We are human. And when you know what you are, you see that we are more than what we've been taught, that we have a soul and a multidimensionality. And I think that the extraterrestrials are very interested in that soul, that our ability to have eternal life, the soul being able to transcend both time and space. When we begin to understand through the development of integration of the different aspects of the psyche, all of the experiences we have, and expand the consciousness, we see that all of this just knocks on the door of the true self, the spiritual self, the multidimensional self. And so this is where our power is. And I think that they want our power.
Yeah.
Which is why we see which is why that's written on the Temple of Apollo, know thyself, when you go visit the Temple of Apollo in Greece. And which is
right.
Yeah, and which is also the basis for a lot of old religions and new religions, religious traditions that are coming out. Know thyself and get to know the soul and self-empowerment. These may seem like something that's idealistic, but they're really not. What you're describing is actually the key to bringing us to full awareness, really. And it's
yes. Yeah. I have a book coming out in the late spring called 5 Steps to Personal Empowerment and Inner Peace, and it is. They can tell you to know yourself, but do they tell you how? How do you know yourself?
Well, in the old days, you probably had to be a priest or priestess and be trained in those things. But I'm sure. But I mean, these days, the more tools we have, I think the better. With the way the world is.
So I have a particular approach to personal empowerment, to self-acceptance, to self-actualization, the ability to live in the world the way that you want to. I believe that it's a fundamental human right to be at ease in both the mind and the body, and to know yourself. And so you can't really change what you can't accept.
Yeah.
And so through knowing ourselves, we begin to accept ourselves, you know, the good, the bad, the different, the indifferent. And through that embracing and honoring and really self-love, we can then create change, because you cannot change what you cannot accept.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Now, we were watching...
So, yeah, we proceed. Yes.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. We were watching one of your videos, and you were talking about that you have support groups where you and I'm sure you teach those tools to these people in the support groups. And you were mentioning that in the environment in those support groups that you have an app that tends to look for different bugs and different that could be hidden because some of the people who've been abducted have experienced different types of bugs and wires or something that's hidden around their environment. And you look for it, and for the app, you have an app that detects that. My question is, have you ever found it, and what was it?
Good question.
Well, we see weird things. So I have two apps, okay? One that picks up anomalous energy, which they call it kind of like a ghost app. It shows you if there's an entity in your environment,
mm-hmm.
or at least they show you the energy fluctuations that can indicate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that one, and so we've seen, we once thought that one of the places we were doing as a support group that there was a camera, because it detects cameras as well, in a smoke detector that was removed. And then we were saying, hey, was that our smoke detector? Did we really put two in the dining room?
Yeah, that's a good. Wow. Yeah, there's a good question.
Yeah.
Did we do that? We don't remember doing that.
Why would we do that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't do that very often. It's just, I think that was the Vice video. They asked about stuff like that. And so, yeah, sometimes it happens. And I'll admit that this is how I feel. I don't really care if somebody's listening in or curious as to what they know. I am the same person, regardless.
Yep.
And you're going to get what you're going to get, and it's not going to make me change at all. So, of course, then we have to ask, was it being used for nefarious reason and so forth? But again, really don't care unless I can create effective change.
Yeah.
So being aware of something, monitoring, okay, you know what, listen, don't we all think our cell phones are monitoring us to a certain degree?
Yeah.
Oh, probably.
Whether we know it or not.
I mean, not just for algorithms of use, but just Friday, I believe it was, I was about to go into session, and I saw that my computer, one of the assistants on it, Cortana was open and listening and recording for who? I didn't turn it on.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I didn't activate mine.
That's kind of scary. I mean, not scary, but that's kind of a little unsettling.
Well, it happened last night. Even my husband and I were discussing something, and then we heard a tone, and I opened the case in my cell phone. You remember, I've got biometrics on and passwords to get into my cell phone, and my cell phone was open and listening, and it had the Google alert listening.
Oh, that's bizarre.
Ooh.
So we cut that off, and we just I'm really beginning to think that it just happens.
Well, that's actually a compliment to you. If they have to listen to you, you're onto something, and that's good.
Here's the thing.
That's the way I see
they could just call me and ask me.
I agree. No, I agree with that. I agree.
Just tell them straight out.
Now, in regards to the people who come to see you, and in regards to the tools that you give to them, what are the top tools that you recommend for somebody who thinks they may be having an experience of that of some kind? They haven't been to see you, they're not sure, but you want to give them tools to help themselves. And so what are the top tools you would give them for that?
The first tool is to begin to create documentation. When you think, why, and by what, and with as much information as possible. Look on the body for any indicators of marks, injections, bruises, scoop marks. You can scan your own body if you sense or think that you have what might be called an extraterrestrial implant. You can scan your body with a high-powered magnet over the area. If there is a metallic object there, it will be drawn up a little to the surface. This will help you determine. There are other scanning devices that some UFO conferences offer that they do some scan. I didn't do it, so I don't really know. But there I would start to begin to accumulate and create a detailed observation as to what's happening physically and emotionally. There's nothing wrong with setting up a motion-detected camera in your bedroom and beginning to gather some information. But get support. Go to a support group. Surround yourself with people who are beginning to go through the same thing or trying to create their own determinations. Get some information. Know that you're not alone. There are lots of steps to move forward depending on your specific type of experience. There's a protocol that you can learn. If you're dealing with the grays, there's a way to interact with the grays. Just stay in your own power by learning. Like, so say the mantis beings, for instance, they're another hive-minded entity, and they have a fear. And that fear is not being connected to the hive. They are very intrigued with our ability to have individuality. That freaks them out. So you find yourself face to face. Stand in your power. Flaunt your individuality. So say I say no. I. They don't like that. So there's a very good chance they'll just throw you back into the ocean.
Say enough with that.
Back in the 1930s in Mount Shasta, there was a movement, and it's still there, called the I Am movement. And I'm wondering if partly it was created as an empowerment to overcome a lot of that, what you're talking about.
Right. Well, in the I Am, it's also understanding on the highest level that we are in a vessel of the human body, interpreting through all of our senses the third dimensional reality for the understanding into the multidimensional self. So knowing what you are, ultimately connected to everything, I am one with the grand of totality. So I am. But once you know what you are, and you need to continue going further, you accept the self, and it's so say I. You begin to master the self, master your skills, become the master of the self, and it's so say I. You're creating your reality. You're manifesting on a more rapid level. So say I, this is what I want. This is what I am going to do. Now, it's like taking your nirvana meditation into an active state. It's great to be blissed out, but then what? Action.
Right. Take it into the real world and see how it plays out.
I just think about when you mentioned about the psychological profiling of like the reptilian, where they at you. So that would be very, very important to start to make sure you know who you are, what you really believe in, and whether or not it really affects your everyday life. And do you have a control over everything in your everyday life? That you would have to build that strength in order to deal with that.
Right, and know that the reptilians are very regimented, and they follow a very strict hierarchy of thinking. And so basically they can't think outside of the box.
Herd thinking.
Right, you got to flaunt but basically what you have to do is outrank them.
Yeah.
That's it. All you got to do is let them know that you outrank them. And by telling them, you have no power over me, so say I.
Yep.
And in doing that, you outrank them. I did have a reptilian experience, and I was with a reptilian, and I told it, for some reason, I believe I showed him in a book. I love books. I showed him in a book that he had no right to my bloodline, to my people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I slammed it so hard in front of his face and like said, back down. And I remember the reptilian taking a step away, and I remember then moving through a doorway and like some other women coming with me. They're like, I'm with her.
Yeah.
You threw him off. You said, I'm not messing with her.
Yeah, I outranked him, and for some reason felt that I provided some form of evidence to prove it. Like I showed him in a book, and it was very empowering, of course.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it's in knowing, you see, it's all about a little bit of education here, and knowing how they act. And in this particular incident, there are different types of reptilians, including the Dracos. And this seemed to be sort of a low-level. It was a low-level guy, and I did force my human outranking, and it worked. I remember that I haven't had an experience with a gray or a reptilian since I've been empowered.
Wow, that's good.
So now, if I have an experience, it'll only be with that higher consciousness.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's extraterrestrial, because I have had what I consider a long-term relationship with a specific type of entity I don't read about. I haven't found it in other books. I've never heard anybody else really describe it, but because they seem to me to be sort of violet but plasma, bright but soft, sort of illuminated from within, and they're in the silhouettes of females, and their voices are high and rapid.
Wow.
And I've glimpsed them my entire life, and they've showed me a lot of things.
Is that almost angelic activity and higher dimension angelic beings, or what humanity would describe as that?
Great question. And I'm going to tell you, I agonized over that very question for 2 years. Okay, the angels are aliens. Angels are aliens, and then it didn't really matter, because there's a celestial hierarchy as well. And so, what we interpret as what could be considered angelic, I would lean in that direction because of the profound, unconditional love, and for the gentleness, for their ability to address me by my name and to ask my expressed permission. Do I want to see? Do I want to go with them? That's loving, kind, gentle.
Yeah.
And even though I misinterpreted half of what they said, only because words have so many meanings.
Yeah.
But I did misinterpret a lot. I was only 30 when I really got to have the deeper experiences, even though they've communicated with me my entire life since early childhood. In fact, one time when I was 6 years old, I was living in Canada, in Ontario, in the middle of winter. And for some reason, I woke up and I stood on my bed and I looked out to the window and I could see my brother being escorted down. Okay, first I saw a light, though, in a field, in an empty lot across, because we lived in a neighborhood that was still being built. Mm-hmm. And I saw two beings walking my brother. They're probably Zetas, maybe Grays, but they looked hard. It was hard to tell from behind.
Yeah.
And I saw them escorting my brother down through our driveway, And just as I was about to knock on the window to call out to my brother's name to tell him we're not allowed to be in the cold without all of our winter clothes on, because it's just ingrained in little Canadian head.
Exactly.
Just about to tell him, and they told me to step back from the window. And I stepped back from the window, and then it was like, just sit down, lay down, and then they made me somehow go back to sleep. They didn't want me to interfere with that.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want me to be taken as well, is my interpretation of that experience. I think that they've protected me, I guess, maybe in some ways. But the strange thing here is I try to walk the line of staying balanced, well-grounded, and using the information to understand and advance consciously.
Yep.
But it's difficult when there are so many different forms of experiences, and when I myself can say that, well, these ones, these seem more protective, and so they do fall more into that category of what the masses would say are angels. But can I say that it's an angel? I can't, but I would say that's how they would describe an angel.
Yeah.
But maybe not so flowery. I mean, they seem to have a gentleness and a love, an unconditional love. I mean, because I'm so naive sometimes. And they told me initially that I passed. And did I want to see? And I said, I passed?
Yeah.
I said,
what does that mean?
Kind of a test or an initiation of some kind?
Well, I mean, I thought they told me I died.
Yeah.
Passed passed. That kind of passed. Okay.
That's what I would have thought.
That's what I mean by misinterpreting. I mean, I keep misinterpreting.
Like, wait a minute. You saying I died?
No, now I get it. But
even though I had done a ton of emotional work and was on my own spiritual thing, I'd been probably meditating for a good 12 years. I was starting to spend time at the Buddhist temple. Even though that they told me I passed, I took it as I died. Yeah. And then they were like, no, you passed. Do you want to see? And I remember like nodding, like, okay, I'm starting to understand. And then I said, yes, I've been waiting for you all of my life. And I didn't know that until those words came out of my mouth. But that was my deepest truth.
Yeah.
And then they did show me that I began to rise with them. I felt different like layers as we moved through the night sky and had that aerial view. But all along I felt, though, as if there was this spiral of that violet energy all around me, almost like some sort of cosmic elevator that I was rising in. But then it came to a stop, and I couldn't see anything but space. But I sensed there was other beings in front of me. And after a moment, and I could still sense the ones behind me, after a moment, it's as though the sky opened and I burst into space, and I looked down to see where my body was. There was no body. There was just stars and planets, and it was like light years between my eyes. And I said, I'm still Laurie. Still, I guess I still thought I died and I was going to go to some reincarnation. And they're like, I'm still Laurie. Yeah. And they laughed. And then I saw in the distance this golden planet, and I just moved, and with a speed I can't describe, and I was there right in front of it. And I sensed basically a fourth, fifth dimension. I sensed this, all of this stuff, and it was just flooding through me, and I was starting to move into it further, and that's when they redirected my energy back and said that, you know, of course I had they spoke the names of my children, and with that I felt a huge gravitational pull. Yeah. But the last thing I did say to them during this experience was, I don't know your name, please come back. And 3 nights later they did come back, and I did have this experience where I learned more of what I was seeing, and an understanding of now my consciousness. I knew that I was more than what I thought I was. I knew that I existed outside of the body just as equally as I could exist inside the body. And so I saw the body now differently. And then I've been on a path of empowerment and personal evolution, and through working, with people and facilitating support groups and empowerment retreats for women. Mostly men have a different way of empowering, and since I'm a woman, I feel more qualified to work with women for that.
Yeah. It was preparing you for the work you're doing now.
Well, I mean, I've always done a lot. I've never just stuck to, I've always been both spiritually inclined, also considered myself at one time a UFO investigator. I did do field research and gather information back in the 90s, and I've continuously progressed, but I'm at a place where I have an understanding of myself.
Here's a question for you.
And I believe
all those, like you said, UFO investigator, therapist, paranormal investigator, I think doing all of those things gives you different perspectives of the overall same understanding. I think you start to make connections between them, how they might fit in with each other. And I think by doing those things and exploring those things, you might have a better understanding overall. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and I do see that on some of the research in just the UFO phenomena, that people who have interactions with either a UFO or through an abduction or contact, they display, a good 80% of them, an increased ability of psychism, and then report for several weeks after other paranormal activity, as well as their own empathetic abilities, or sometimes even their ability to really read somebody else's mind through telepathy.
Yep.
So that there's a bleed through. All of these phenomena are connected because they all teach us that the world, our reality, everything is far larger, more complicated than we've been led to believe. We see that our energies are manipulated into an external world, to externalize into getting an education, a formal one, and making money and trying to buy a big house and having a fancy car. And this somehow equates success, where the true self and the truer reality for the human experience should be intrinsic, intuitive, to move within, to understand that, because that creates empowerment. And what happens when everybody ends up empowered is that nobody feels superior and nobody feels inferior. You can allow somebody to believe what they want, and it doesn't make you feel triggered or challenged, and you don't have to push your beliefs. You can allow people to think what they want and don't really care if they believe what you believe or not, because that's their right. It shouldn't trigger you.
Exactly. They're at a different stage than you are, too, as far as understanding. So you'd have to understand.
And a different soul age, too. Because I believe there are some older souls and there's newer souls, and they look at the world differently. Right.
And so the idea then in life is, as we move towards human attainment, to understanding the world and the universe and the dimensions and everything around us to the best of our ability, as we move towards this human attainment, or towards top of the mountain, what we should do is remove the obstacles for those behind us, to just allow it to be a little easier, to share, to help, to guide, to be there no matter where somebody else's thoughts are. It's really just the opportunity to help and work in a way that promotes the overall health and well-being of everybody, no matter where they're at.
Yep, share the understanding and share the wealth.
It's a big dream.
Yep. I have to ask you this one question, because I'm fascinated to figure out what your answer will be. As far as what a ghost is, what is a ghost to you? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you think they are the spirits of someone who's passed on, or do you have any other theories based on that?
Well, a ghost is a disincarnate being, so without a physical form. And if a human dies and the soul comes out of the body and the soul is not ready to leave because they have attachments or they have addictions, they may stick around and haunt somebody who has that same addiction. Lots of ghosts in bars because they want to get just as drunk as they were, and so the closest they can get to it is to be near somebody who emanates that behavior.
Yeah.
So, but then there are another form of ghost, which is more like a trapped residual energy. The soul is gone. There's a little bit of residual energy, and it's left on a loop, playing over and over and over and over and over. And it's so wound up that it eventually will dissipate. But the higher essence of that being isn't trapped in it. So it's not going to be like a ghost who would interact with you, but it may be one, say, every night at 9 o'clock you see it come and look out the window. Okay, that's what I'm talking about, as opposed to one that is looking over your shoulder, and you can feel and sense their presence or glimpse their apparition.
That makes sense, because I would agree with the residual that it's such an ingrained pattern that whatever was left over of the energy is probably producing that. And that's why when you see someone, oh, they looked right through me, they didn't see me, but I saw them, that kind of thing. Versus someone who's...
Yeah, it's like the energy trapped in perpetual motion.
Yeah.
and until it simply dissipates completely. So, yeah, there are ghosts. I've had, seen things and had experiences that are difficult to explain. I used to get this cold feeling of somebody observing me, and I bought a house where an elderly couple had passed away within a few weeks of each other.
Oh, yeah.
And there was still left some recipes taped to the inside door of the cabinet in the kitchen.
Wow.
And a couple of like bottle opening and can opener things on little hooks, which I took them off, and they would be put back on. And I would say to them, why are you putting them back up? I'm yelling at everybody in the house, Bob, I don't want them there. I'm putting them in a box. These stuff are being donated, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, we're not doing it. And then we realized that there was somebody who had been very attached to that house, that life, and was still wanting to be there. And you could feel just a coldness, like just a slight resentment that we're trying to, well, it was like I'd move it and she'd be like, no, this is my house, and put it back.
Things go in where I put them.
So, I did have to do that. Well, no, you're not here now, and it's okay. And although shocking, because sometimes they don't realize they're dead.
Now, how do those people transcend and move onward if they really want to stay where they were? Do they just stay? Or does somebody ever make them move on? Or is there a way that,
somebody can help them? Somebody can pray for them. That helps too, because there's a power in that energy. And we can help direct them by letting them know, this is where I live now, and explain to them what happened. But also tell them, look for something brighter. Look.
Yeah.
And let them, and see if there's any way we can assist. I mean, we can only do our best. And again, now, perhaps, with this particular person's soul evolution, they needed to learn attachment. Perhaps they needed to understand attachment.
Yeah.
And so they stayed. I believe many Asian cultures think that there's 100 days after the death of a person that the soul has an opportunity to move around the earth, saying goodbye, settling, and preparing themselves then to move on.
I believe
and I like that, actually.
I believe that because my mother, when she passed, I would dream and see her in my apartment, and she would wonder why all of her stuff were in boxes in my apartment. And I dreamed of her for maybe 6 months after that, and then one dream, and then at the end of 6 months, she was telling me that she was saying goodbye and she was going on a bus. So it actually fits in with that theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if somebody in your family passes away, you can't go to temple for 100 days because the soul might be following you. And they don't want the spirits in the temple.
Interesting.
I believe that because my sister had a dream where my mother was trying to go into a church and one of her relatives tried to stop her, and she said, "You can't go in there." And my mother said, "Why?" She said, "Because that woman doesn't exist anymore."
Wow.
Wow.
It's exactly what you're saying, isn't it? I mean, it's close to what you're saying.
And they can, they do speak to us because that's our opportunity in the dream state or in a trance state. And I do what's called some etheric plane communication for people dealing with loved ones they want to help pass or who have passed and they're having a hard time with it. Lost opportunity to communicate before they, move on, can be very healing and understand, that just because you're not in the body, in this, because we perceive time this way. Once you're outside of the body and you begin to move into the afterlife, time then doesn't exist in the same way.
Yeah.
And, it also teaches us, too, that we are who we are in the body and when we're not in the body. And not having a body is unbelievable. And it's fluid. And it's fast. And it's amazing. But having a body is incredible, to be able to see the different shades of green when the sun is filtering through a tree, or to watch life unfold. It's here for a reason. It's a great, great opportunity, but because of politics and different forces on the planet, people don't really get a chance to appreciate the full opportunity of living.
The full beauty of life.
In our society, here we're just producers and consumers.
Yeah, exactly.
Work so you can buy, work and buy so you can pay the bill. And you know what? That's not the idea. Although we're great manifestors, and if you look out your window, every single thing was man-made, manufactured through the manifestation of our thoughts. We build houses, and we're really incredible. And so we have this really great opportunity, except that we've been at constant war for several thousand years. There's been a war on the planet, one place or another. And until we can stop the external aspect and begin to internalize, becoming more empowered, more peaceful, more accepting, then there will be less to war about.
Yep, I agree.
There will be less to fight about. So all of the phenomena, all of them are opening us up to bigger and better, larger understanding and expanded consciousness. And the biggest opportunity of all, which is to begin to know ourselves. And even if that means having to meet 4 different extraterrestrial races first, just because an ET race is advanced with technology that might look like magic to us, it is simply just technology. And it's very important that we don't give our power away through fear or our power away through awe. They're so great. They're going to come and fix everything. They told
I've
me
heard
we
that
have
one
a
before.
pollution issue. Yeah, give me a bloody break.
That's how I feel too. I agree with you on that. Yeah.
I don't think that we should be identifying with the extraterrestrials in that way. Got a whole lot of people running around calling themselves starseeds. Again, give me a break.
That's how I felt. Give me a break.
Yeah, it's a phase.
Thank you for that.
You have to. Yeah, you're welcome. I like to call it the way I see it, because otherwise we can become self-delusional. And we can begin to think that we're so damn special. My ETs are my family. Well, you know what that is? They claim me. That's just another word for possession.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
Thank you, Laurie. So, I've always wanted to say that to a lot of these to a lot of people who term that.
It's like, claim me, I'll tell you what you can
It
claim.
makes me look like I'm some mean person who doesn't believe in what they're saying, so I just, I don't argue.
gotta
it's not
respect their
that at
beliefs.
all.
That's what I try to do. I try to respect it, but I feel differently, and you know,
And you should
sometimes
have a right to express that as well. And here's
I
the
agree
thing.
with that. I do have that, yeah.
I'm a little older, and so I don't feel so inclined to be politically correct. One, because I'm not a politician, so therefore I can speak my truth.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. That freedom is very
Absolute truth
that
right
freedom
there.
is very empowering, and it should be allowed for everybody. I agree with that.
Right. And you know, and no negativity to the people who are identifying themselves in that area, but I can tell you that is a delusion, and you have to bring yourself up to a higher understanding. You know, do people interact with specific extraterrestrial races? They do. But creating this, claiming this possession, and I'm a starseed, and everything is light and love, no, not true either. This is a planet of duality. We have night and day, masculine and feminine, good and bad, real and not real. And so it's best to keep it real.
How do you feel about some of the groups, and I'm not trying to put them down, I'm just asking how you feel about them, some of these groups that march in parades and put up signs that said, "Welcome, Star Brothers, come
Take
here,
us.
we're your brothers and sisters, we love you, take us and come land here, we're here for you."
Come land.
How do you feel? How do you feel about? About those types of groups that focus on that?
Well, I think that they're totally giving away their power.
I think so too.
Come on, come here, and do whatever you want. Yeah, you know, save us. Listen, you know who's going to save us? We are going to save ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And nobody else, because that's the way it's going to work. Otherwise, it's a manipulation of power and energy. We can't say, "Oh, come and take me." Oh, Jesus. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's not healthy. And plus, not for naught here. You do risk the chance of being taken against your will because you have just complied and agreed to being taken. And so now you've opened the door to reptilian abduction, gray abduction, and you just asked for it. And so do we agree and comply with them, and that's why they're allowed to take us? When we do irresponsible things like that, yeah. So if you're going to have a relationship with an extraterrestrial, then it needs to be a balanced, healthy, respectful relationship where, like I said, they call you by your name, they ask you your express permission, there's a particular protocol in creating contact, you go opening some paranormal door, you don't know what you're letting in.
Yeah.
So there's another responsible way of doing these things. And so all of these groups getting together, hopefully other groups like mine will supersede that energy and circumvent any negativity that can inadvertently happen from just being naive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always felt that approach was naive, so I'm very glad to hear you express it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you...
Well, it can't really be viewed any other way.
How would you, overall, would you say, what are some traits in abductee individuals that are similar that have... Maybe that's why that particular person was abducted. Do you know what I mean? Is there any similarities between them? Because I know you've obviously been in therapy with a lot of them. Is there similarities of the type of person?
We see a higher percentage in North America of blue-eyed people being abducted.
I'm blue-eyed.
So we can't say definitively why. We see that people who have been abducted share certain things like allergies. They may all be allergic to penicillin, or they may all be allergic to sulfa-based drugs. They all might share a same allergy. Also, people who have a willingness to broaden can open themselves to contact, which doesn't necessarily mean abduction.
Uh-huh.
So, and even say the abductors, the Greys, they might send a couple of short Greys to get you or to harvest some genetics or to bring you somewhere. But they're just more mechanical, more artificial intelligence than actual intelligence.
Right.
And so they lack total emotional connection.
Scientific
but now
drones,
the tall, yeah, I believe that they're programmed to only do specific tasks. And when they're challenged with something outside of that task, then a taller Gray will enter the scene and take over, and actually come with a bit of an attitude. They do have they don't have a very good attitude at all.
See their supervisor?
Yeah, they're supervisors. Well, and that's just it. It is like that.
Wow.
Like, get the job done. I don't
So
care what you do.
Huh.
That's right. It's like you screwed up. How come this subject is no longer in that hypnagogic paralyzed state? How come they're conscious? What did you do wrong? Right. So once you wake up and you're in the presence of the two smaller Greys, and if you're not freaking out, they have no idea what to do. And then the taller Gray will come and take over. And at that point, it's generally it's harvesting. It really is tissue, eggs, sperm, everything that might be associated with the hybridization program. And I think the hybrids are being created for some form of integration on the planet, but also in order to see if the hybrids can hold a soul.
Interesting.
So a Gray lives, tall Gray, about 900, 1,000 years, and then they die. The reptilians have a very similar, not quite as long of a lifespan, and then they die. Whereas the human is the same being outside of the body as they are in the body, therefore giving us access to all dimensions, because we have the multidimensional self, the soul, and they do not. All they have is technology. So, in a way, the human, with our ability of integrating the mind, the body, and the spirit, perhaps at some point through development, we might be able to create the Merkaba from the body. And that would be sort of that time-space machine, just us. And maybe that is the soul or the conscious changing from Merkaba to manifested being or human.
It's like we're almost more organically advanced, but we just don't understand and realize what we are and what we have and what we could possibly do.
Right, because we keep being manipulated and distracted into the external world to, go buy that next fancy phone.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just look at that.
Yep. Little shiny things.
Instead of checking out the sky.
It's true.
Shiny things.
It's true. Those
that's
distractions. Right. Now, if somebody were to come to you and we're interested in your work, what websites and
how would they get a hold of you?
How would they get in touch with you? And also, are there any books that you have out that you would recommend them to pick up and take a look before they actually come see you? So, what are the links to those sites, and what are some of the works that you recommend?
So, my editor is here right now, and he's just finishing a book called The Extraterrestrial Interference, and I've started and stopped it 2 or 3 times, but now I've completed it, and that should be coming out in the spring. In May, I'll be doing a conference at Earth Origins in Sedona. Hopefully I'll have that book there, as well as the 5 Steps to Personal Empowerment. So you can get a hold of me at TrueYouHypnotherapy.com. You can follow me at Laurie's True You on Twitter. And I'm also on Facebook under True You Hypnotherapy and Laurie McDonald. And know that I am here for you. If you need information, if you need to be redirected to somebody in your area, I'm also the president of OPUS. It's a large nonprofit organization that works for the understanding and support of people who have paranormal activity. And you can check us out at opusnetwork.org. And there's a free 24-hour, 7-day-a-week online support group for people experiencing alien interference.
Nice. Good to know.
Do you have a YouTube channel as well? Correct?
No, but there's all kinds of stuff. Okay. But I've never put anything out there myself. But I see that lectures I've done and TV shows and other radio interviews and so forth are there if people are interested.
Okay.
Great.
I'll make sure I include all your links too when we post this as well.
Thank you.
They'll be able to get hold of you. Well, I want to thank you for taking time out to have a good discussion.
Yeah, this has been incredible, actually.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I do some interviews, but when my friends like Jackie say, "Hey, if do this one," then I always do.
Well, I thank you very much for taking the time, because I know you're busy. You got a lot of projects going on.
Absolutely. Well, it's been my pleasure.
All right, have a good day, and thanks a lot.
Have a great Sunday.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye, Laurie.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was a great conversation. There's things I never really thought about that she said that make a lot of sense now.
Makes a lot of sense, and that's what happens when you talk to an expert in this field. This is what they do, so they can make sense of things that are such a mystery and that boggles people's minds.
Yeah.
And I think that the more research we do on this like she does, the more we're going to be able to open doors and find out what's really going on and how we can help ourselves in all fields of things and because it begins with helping you.
Yeah, well, I mean, and like what she said, it's important to know who you are.
Yes.
And I think in any kind of investigation field, like the paranormal, UFOs, energy, anything, there's a connection between it all. We don't necessarily know exactly what the connection is.
Right.
We can start making parallels on things that overlap, things that maybe you make the connections to, but I just think that the more you investigate in all of those fields, the better understanding you have overall. You may not have all the answers you want. You probably have a lot more questions than you did when you started, but you have starting to have a little better understanding that it's bigger than the sum of its parts.
Definitely. And also, I love how she keeps talking about self-empowerment. And you know how people always think it's such a corny thing to say, it all begins with you, but it really does.
It is.
It really does begin with you. Yeah.
Well, and you think like when she was saying when I asked about the aggression and the psychological, that knowing who you are is very important. Because if you think about even in warfare, when they torture prisoners, psychologically and physically, that the ones that sustain and survive and maybe are released as prisoners of war are the ones that really stick to who they are.
Yes.
They understand what they're going through, but they have to maintain who they are, where they are. And I actually think back to when I worked on Alcatraz, some of the inmates saying the only thing that kept them alive was things that they knew for sure, everyday things like their favorite ball games they would replay in their head, songs they would sing that they knew, memories, stories, things that would get them through it. And I think having a sense of that stuff, which is part of you.
Yeah, a sense of self.
Yeah.
Not getting lost in the hive thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't believe anything anyone tells you. Believe what you know to be true.
Right.
And your understanding, and look at it from a bigger perspective, I think.
Right. Great lessons for what she's doing, and great lessons for what we have to work with every day on Earth as human beings.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's always for the greater good. You learn the greater good. You hope to rise to the greater good.
Yeah. And I think the audience of this program is very interested in that, and they're such eager learners, our listeners.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of, like we were talking earlier as well, there's a lot of paranormal shows that I only want to do shows about ghosts and hauntings and demons. Well, we've learned that if you only talk about ghosts, you're going to be very limited.
Right.
And you start to ignore things that are maybe crossing over into other fields like ufology,
right,
Bigfoot, cryptids, that I think you have to really throw a broader net to really capture some of that.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely what we're about.
Yeah, we sure are. And I hope we continue to cover subjects that very few think about or talk about, but I think it's important to put it out there.
It is, and I think that's, and I know I look for, and you do as well, stories that maybe are not so mainstream, that people may not know about, that we can maybe dig a little more and present it so that some of these stories aren't forgotten, that people are like, oh, I didn't even know that existed or that happened.
Right, and people come up to us and they always tell us, have you heard of this? And if we haven't, we're all ears. We go, no, tell us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been some we've done, and people say, "Oh, you should do this." We already have.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's happened a lot too. Yeah.
But I'm always fascinated by new stories that and usually we find them while we're doing research for other ones. We stumble across them.
Right, and don't be afraid to message us through Facebook,
Yep.
or for those of
Or
you
leave
who have our
comments.
phone numbers, or leave comments on our posts,
Yep.
on our Facebook posts, or for those of you who know our phone numbers, to call us and say, hey, we have an idea.
Or if you can leave comments also on our ectoportal.podbean.com.
Oh, right, yeah.
You can leave comments
it there too. Yeah.
underneath the actual
we look
episode.
for them. Yeah.
Yep. So leave it under the episode, and what are your thoughts? What are your feelings about some of the subjects? Do you like that episode? Let us know what you liked. If maybe you found out something we didn't know,
Yeah.
we'd love to hear it from you.
After all, we are doing this for your listening benefit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for this week. Until next week, we'll say goodbye.
See you next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Ross Bugden.